I used to think love meant adjusting myself like furniture, shifting, softening, staying where I was placed. I thought it meant learning to shrink without being asked. I thought it meant becoming easier to love by being less of myself. He never yelled. He never raised a hand. He smiled, paid for dinner, remembered the names of my coworkers. He looked like every girl's dream from the outside. And I was so desperate to be loved that I ignored what was missing on the inside. He didn't like when I wore red, said it was too loud, said I looked like I was trying too hard. So I gave away the red dress. I used to love the one I wore the day I landed my job, the one that made me feel brave. He didn't like my old friends, said they were jealous, toxic, attention-seeking. So I stopped answering their texts, told them I was busy. I was busy surviving a love that asked me to erase myself. He didn't like my art, said it was too abstract, too raw, that it didn't make sense. So I painted less, then stopped. Then threw away the sketchbook that held my soul in scribbled charcoal and aching pastels. I called it compromise. He called it growth. But it wasn't either. It was silence. A slow suffocation wrapped in affection. He loved me most when I was quiet, still predictable. The truth is, he never had to control me by force. He only had to make me feel like I was loved conditionally. That the more agreeable I became, the more he'd stay. And I clung to that version of love like a drowning girl clings to driftwood. And it wasn't just him. I had been trained long before he came to smile when I wanted to scream, to say sorry when I was the one bleeding, to sit still and be grateful that anyone had chosen me at all. I remember one night in particular we were sitting on the balcony of his apartment, wine glasses half full, the city glittering below us like hope. I showed him a small painting I had worked on in secret. It was a self-portrait but not literal. Just emotion blue shadows, fiery reds, jagged shapes trying to crawl off the page. He stared at it for a long time and said, "It's kind of messy, don't you think?" And something inside me folded. I laughed it off, said I was experimenting, that it didn't mean anything, but it did. It was the last thing I painted for 2 years. I started to lose color, little by little. I stopped wearing eyeliner. My laugh got softer. My opinions, quieter. My goals rearranged to support his. I told myself I was becoming mature, that I was choosing love, but I was just choosing survival again, because real love doesn't ask you to kill pieces of yourself to earn peace. The day I realized I was disappearing wasn't a grand revelation. It was small. I was standing in front of a mirror, wearing a beige sweater I didn't like, getting ready for another one of his networking events. I looked at my reflection and didn't see myself. I saw a woman who used to be bright, loud, unapologetic, and now she looked neat, tamed, erased. That's when it whispered. The voice I hadn't heard in years. "If this is love, why do I feel like I'm fading?" I blinked. The moment passed, but something had cracked. Not loudly, but deep. A week later, I tried to write again, just a few lines in a journal. He found it, read it, and said, "Why would you even think that way? You're not depressed. You're just ungrateful." And a gunny folded. I told myself he was right. I had a good life, a smart, stable partner, a warm home. Why wasn't I satisfied? But it was then I remembered the past, the other life. A memory I didn't know I still carried. Not a dream, not a vision. A feeling like a wound under my skin that never healed right in that life too. I was loved, and then erased. In that life too, I died in a room that looked like home. And I realized this wasn't the first time I mistook control for care. And maybe, just maybe this time, I had the chance to choose differently. But first, I had to remember who I was, and that would require more courage than I'd ever needed before. They called it a celebration, a day of honor, a ritual of tradition where daughters stood in silk and lace, and parents chose the futures they believed best. But I knew it as something else. The day I died, once, and now, the day I would begin again. The morning sun bled into the room like gold ink spilled across silk. Servants moved quietly. My mother fussed with flowers. My sister, graceful as ever, smiled as she combed her long hair. She looked like the perfect bride, because she had been once. In my place, my hands trembled only once that morning. Just once, when I laced the final ribbon at my back and caught my reflection. This version of me did not smile. This version of me did not bow. She stood tall, unafraid, with memory behind her and fire beneath her ribs. I walked into the great hall. Just as the guests began to gather, the air smelled of incense and expectation. My father's voice carried as he greeted the man they had chosen for me. I knew that voice. I knew that laugh. Even in this life, he looked the same, handsome, composed, clever. My sister's eyes sparkled when she saw him, and with joy, but with perfect clarity. They believed I would agree again, that I would take the path laid before me. They had no idea I had lived this once, that I had bled in silence while they wrote the script, but not this time. I stepped forward, quiet as a ghost. I would like to make a choice, I said. The room fell silent. My mother blinked. My father frowned. My daughter, it has already been arranged. I know, I interrupted softly, but I would still like to choose. It was bold, unheard of, but I was no longer afraid. My gaze swept the room until it landed on the man they all feared. Cale, a veteran, a warrior, scarred by battle and silence. He stood alone in the corner of the hall, like a shadow refusing the light. He had not come seeking a bride. He had come out of duty to pay respects, to be seen. He was from another province, a man with no wealth, no titles, only rumors. And I pointed to him. I wished to marry Cale. Gasps, whispers. My mother dropped her fan. My sister's mouth parted in shock. Cale looked up slowly, his eyes unreadable. You cannot mean this, my father said, voice tightening. You are meant to marry. No, I said. I was meant to be silent. I was meant to disappear again, but I won't. Cale stepped forward, his posture stiff with confusion. Why? He asked, his voice low. Why would you choose me? I met his eyes because you have never lied to me. He stared. The room waited. And after a long, suffocating silence, he bowed. If this is your wish, I will honor it. And just like that, the path shifted. My sister turned toward our parents, her voice low with urgency. I couldn't hear her words, but I knew the cadence. She was trying to stop it, trying to salvage her second chance with the man she loved. The man she stole from me, and I would let them have each other. Let the poison run its course while I would rise again. They wed us in haste. A quiet ceremony, no music, no applause. Just whispered prayers and the sound of Cale's breath beside me, steady, calm, as though this was any other day. But it was not any other day. It was the day I stepped fully into the life they tried to bury. My mother wept softly in the corner, though I couldn't tell whether it was grief or embarrassment. My father's jaw tightened every time his eyes met mine. My sister, she didn't even stay. She vanished from the room. Before our vows were spoken, good, let her stew in the bitter broth. She once stirred for me. Cale offered me his hand when it was done. His skin was rough, scarred knuckles, weather-worn palm. Not the hand of a polished prince. No. The hand of a man who had bled for everything he had, and I took it without hesitation. We left the hall in silence. The weight of stairs pressed against our backs, but the moment we were alone, truly alone, turned to him. I know what they say about you, I said. That you've killed more men than you can count. That you don't sleep through the night. That you speak to ghosts. He looked at me, unmoved. And do you believe them? I shook my head. I believe ghosts only linger where injustice lives. His lips twitched, not quite a smile, but something softer, something real. He did not touch me that night, did not reach for me or claim me or demand anything at all. Instead, he gave me something no one ever had: space, respect, a room of my own, lined with quiet, a meal prepared without request, a single candle lit by the window. I don't know why you chose me, he said as he stood in the doorway, but I will not break you. And then he left me with the night. I stood by the window for hours, staring at the moon, wondering if this was peace, the kind that grows not from safety, but from choice. I had chosen Cale, and even if he never came to love me, I already knew I would never regret it, because the fire in my chest no longer burned with fear. It burned with purpose, and now that I was his wife, I had all I needed to begin the plan. The slow, meticulous dismantling of everything they built. On my grave, my sister would think she won, that I was gone. Out of the way, replaced again. But she did not see the truth. She had married a man incapable of real loyalty, and I had married the only man who knew the cost of war. They thought I had vanished, that marrying Cale was a sentence of silence, an exile wrapped in a bridal veil. They didn't know I was watching every letter they sent, every trade they made, every smile my sister gave that wasn't hers to give. I had eyes in the market, in the kitchens, in the servants' corridors, and what I didn't see, I heard, because people talk when they think you're no one. Cale returned late most nights, his coat heavy with dust and the scent of steel. He never asked where I went during the day, never tried to control me. He only watched quietly, like someone who knew that fire burned brighter when left unchained, and he began to soften. He brought me dried flowers from foreign fields. He listened when I read aloud. He asked what kind of music I liked, then tried badly to hum the tune. I caught him laughing once when he thought I wasn't listening. I never expected to love again. But sometimes peace creeps in like that, soft as candlelight, Fierce as spring, still, peace was a luxury I couldn't afford not yet, because, while Cale built a home, I was unearthing graves. I discovered the truth slowly, like peeling rust from a sword. My sister and her husband, once my husband, were selling off parcels of my father's land bit by bit, claiming rights they hadn't earned, using his name to curry favor with nobles, whispering lies in royal ears, and worse, they were preparing to send my child, my son from my past life, now reborn into another family, to the same school where I had once been isolated, silenced, reshaped into something quiet. I would not let history repeat, so I began to write anonymous letters, signed with names that no longer lived. Accounts of bribery, stories of falsified ledgers, seeds of doubt dropped into the ears of those who hungered for scandal and Cale. Cale never asked why. He simply placed a blade on my desk one night, beside a velvet pouch of coin. For the next time you need to travel, he said. I looked up at him. Are you afraid of what I'm becoming? No, he said. I'm afraid of the ones who thought you never would. And in that moment, I knew I had married not just a man, but an ally, and together we would watch it all burn. The scandal broke on a Tuesday. Whispers turned into questions. Questions turned into inquiries. And soon, noble families who once clinked glasses with my sister and her husband began to pull away. Slowly, strategically, like rats sensing water. In a sinking ship, I never signed my name to a single accusation. I didn't have to. The truth has its own voice, and those who feel guilty always hear it. The loudest, my sister arrived at my door unannounced one morning. Fury painted across her face like war paint. How dare you meddle in our affairs? She hissed, her voice barely containing the venom beneath. I poured tea for two and didn't flinch. You mistake your lies for truth so often, I said. You no longer know the sound of honesty. She stared at me, searching, wondering if somehow, some way, I had remembered, but she couldn't know for sure. Not yet. Cale entered the room behind me, his presence enough to send a ripple of unease through her. He said nothing, simply placed a firm hand on my shoulder and stood there, like a wall. She left with more silence than she came with, but that was the first crack. After that, the unraveling came quicker than I expected. A nobleman's son, one who had been cheated out of land he was promised, came forward with records. A merchant presented falsified trade agreements, and an old friend of my father's confirmed that certain seals had been forged. My sister's husband tried to defend their name, but nothing built on rot can stand, and so they fell. Not all at once, not in a blaze, but in a slow, excruciating collapse. Their house, once filled with parties and power, grew quiet. Servants left, debts climbed, invitations stopped arriving, and I watched not with glee, but with justice curling in my lungs. Like fresh air, Cale stood beside me the day the officials arrived to reclaim the stolen land. He looked at me and asked only one question. Do you feel free now? I closed my eyes. Not yet, but close, because I had one more thing to do. The night I returned to the estate, my parents' estate, was thick with autumn smoke and memory. They had summoned everyone for the annual harvest gathering. A tradition, they said, though I suspected it was more of a lifeline. An attempt to pretend that the world was not falling apart, that their beloved daughters still stood side by side. But I was no longer the daughter they knew, and my sister was no longer the woman she pretended to be. She wore a soft pink gown that clung to her like a whisper, her hand looped delicately around her husband's arm. She smiled at me across the garden as though we were still girls, as though she hadn't stood in a room while I bled out, as though she hadn't held my child and handed him to someone else. Cale stood beside me, his presence quiet and powerful, a shadow carved in stone. My hand found his without thinking. He didn't move, didn't flinch. Just let me hold on. Dinner was a performance. My father trying too hard. My mother sipping wine with a gaze sharp as glass. My sister offering compliments with sugar-laced tones. Her husband, watching me like he knew I was the ghost he never buried well enough. I played my part. I spoke of travel, of trade, of politics. I made them laugh, and then I mentioned the land. My voice dropped, just slightly. I heard, I said casually, that the western fields are being returned to the crown. The table paused. My sister's knuckles went white around her fork. I wonder who was foolish enough to sell what was never theirs. No one responded. I leaned back in my chair. Cale sipped his wine. It was a warning, a final one, because I wasn't just reclaiming land, I was reclaiming memory and justice and the story they had stolen. It was raining when the final notice came. Not the kind of rain that screams and shouts, but the kind that whispers, that slides down windows like secrets and soft regrets. Cale handed me the letter before I could open the door. It's done, he said, his voice low, solid. I didn't need to open it. I already knew what it would say. The land had been seized. the final property titles revoked. The court had sided with the crown and against my sister and her husband, and just like that, everything they stole was no longer theirs. The same hands that had dragged me into death now grasped desperately for a future that was slipping through, their fingers like wet sand. Later that week, I saw them in the village square. My sister wore a worn cloak. Her husband's boots were scuffed. No servants followed. No horses waited. She looked older, not in years but in spirit. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time since my return, she looked afraid, not of exposure but of me. I walked past her, not a word. Justice doesn't need noise, only presence that night. Cale wrapped me in silence. He didn't speak, didn't ask. He simply held me as I breathed out years of ache I hadn't known. I still carried Dot, because vengeance may be cold, but healing is warm, and I was finally ready to let go. The morning after the judgment was quieter than expected. No parades, no applause, just the sound of Cale boiling water for tea while I stood by the window, watching crows circle above the distant hills. I had thought, for so long, that this moment would taste like victory, that it would burn sweet on my tongue and rise in my chest like a song of justice fulfilled. But it didn't. It settled softly like the first snow still, unassuming and strange in its silence. Cale placed the cup beside me and didn't say anything. He never spoke unless it mattered. And somehow he always knew when it mattered. "They're leaving," I said. "My sister and her husband." He nodded once to where no one knows them, where their lies might pass as truth again. But I knew better. Even in unfamiliar lands, guilt carries its own scent, and shame doesn't wash off so easily. I turned from the window and finally looked around the home we'd built slowly together. Each stone set with effort, each chair carved by Cale's hands. This was not just a place, it was a life. And for the first time, I had no need to run from it. I visited my parents' estate one final time before winter. My mother greeted me with cautious warmth, her eyes lingering longer than usual. "You've changed," she said. "Yes," I replied, "and I won't change back." She seemed both saddened and relieved by that truth. My father, older than I remembered him, walked with a slight limp now. He tried to speak to me of property, of politics, but I waved it all away. "I don't want what was stolen," I told him. "I only wanted it returned." We stood in the orchard where he used to lift me onto his shoulders. He said I was blind to many things. I didn't reply. Some silences are more forgiving than words. Cale and I made our life far from court drama and far from gossip. We grew our own food, repaired what we broke. He wrote stories in the evenings, ones he never showed anyone but me. And I painted the memories I remembered. The child I had lost, the face of my sister before betrayal touched it. I painted Cale's hands because they had never failed me. One night I stood by the fire watching him sleep, and I whispered aloud, "I thought love was something you survived. I didn't know it could be something that healed." The wind outside answered, and I knew my story had been rewritten, not with ink, but with choice. And this time, I chose me. The snow came late that year, thick. White drifts settled on the rooftops of our small village, blanketing the world in a quiet peace I hadn't known in either of my lives. And yet, in that stillness, I felt something stir inside me, a flame, not of vengeance, but of closure. Cale and I were walking the fields when I stopped to watch the birds cut through the silver sky. "I dreamed of him last night," I whispered. Cale didn't ask who. He knew. My son, the child they took from me, the one I never got to hold for more than a heartbeat in the dream. He was laughing, running through fields with hair like mine and eyes I'd never seen awake. He didn't speak, but he looked. Back at me was something that felt like forgiveness. Maybe it was time I forgave myself. A year passed. My sister wrote to me once. It was a short letter, clumsily penned. No apology, no rage. Just a request. "Did you ever truly hate me?" I didn't reply. Not because I couldn't, but because I no longer needed to. Some truths are spoken only in silence, and the answer was simple. I had hated her deeply, until I no longer did. Because hate, like love, requires too much space in the heart, and I had filled mine with other things. Peace, art, the sound of Cale chopping wood in winter, the smell of bread baking in our small oven, the soft ache in my hands after hours of painting. Life. One evening, the village invited us to a festival. Children ran wild and painted masks. Lanterns bobbed through the streets like floating stars. And for the first time, Cale danced with me beneath an old tree, his hands steady, his steps awkward. "You're not afraid anymore," he said. "No," I replied. "I'm not. Because I had already died once. I had already been betrayed, broken, silenced, and yet here I was, smiling, alive, free." Years later, I returned to the capital, not for vengeance, not for reckoning, but for art. My paintings were displayed in a modest gallery, a quiet collection titled The Lives We Lived. Among them, a portrait of a woman in flames, a child in a sunlit meadow, a faceless man holding a crown made of thorns, and one of Kale sleeping peacefully beneath a window full of stars. People cried. Some recognized me, most didn't, and that was the point. I wasn't that woman anymore. I was the one who came after. I never had children again, but in every student I taught to draw, in every seed I planted, in every widow I helped rebuild her home, I felt his spirit, my son gone. Yes, but not lost. He had been the spark of my rebirth, the light that pulled me out of the grave, and I carried him in every breath of my new life. I no longer told this story for vengeance. I told it for her, the girl. I was the one who thought silence was safety, the one who mistook control for love, the one who believed being chosen was the same as being seen. I tell this story to show her she was never weak, just misled, just unfinished. And now she is whole, because I am her, and I am still here.